In 1897, travelers vanished inside a mountain inn, and no one ever saw them leave. The Smoky Mountains at dusk were not kind to strangers. Fog slithered down the ridgelines, and the smell of damp pine and smoke from unseen cabins lingered in the air. It was here, at the very edge of wilderness, that the Wycliffe Family Inn stood, a two-story timber structure glowing with lantern light, promising warmth, rest, and food to the weary. But the promise was a lie. The Wycliffe Inn became known as the last place dozens of travelers were ever seen alive. Stagecoaches stopped, guests signed the register, but no trace of them was ever found beyond the Wycliffe's threshold. Inside, the inn was unsettlingly quiet. The ticking of a brass clock echoed through the narrow halls, its pendulum swinging like a metronome counting down to doom. Guests described the floorboards as too soft, too hollow, and the air heavy with an odor, not of wood smoke and bread, but of something metallic, sharp, almost like blood. Rumors whispered that the Wycliffe family served stew that tasted strangely sweet, unlike any venison or pork locals had ever known. By the late 1890s, the Smoky Mountains were dotted with disappearances. Loggers, traveling salesmen, and honeymooners who checked into the Wycliffe Family Inn were never heard from again. But the sheriff's searches turned up nothing. Each time, the Wycliffes smiled with perfect courtesy, offering warm cornbread to the search parties and swearing the guests had gone on their way. The inn's guestbook, however, told a darker story. Pages filled with names had no exit marks. It became a ledger of the damned. How could so many vanish under one roof, without a single body ever being found? Locals began to whisper of a trapdoor, of tunnels carved into the earth beneath the inn, of bones buried beneath the orchard where the Wycliffes pressed cider. One traveler who escaped swore he heard screams through the floorboards, muffled by the clatter of dishes above. The legend grew darker. Some claimed the Wycliffes weren't just murderers but cannibals, that their hospitality was a mask, their Sunday dinners nothing but ritual feasts. Even today, modern scandals of corporate dynasties and political families feel eerily similar: power built on secrecy, crimes hidden in plain sight, and victims who simply disappear. The Wycliffe Inn still stands in fragments, rotting deep in the Smokies, and yet the earth around it is rumored to bleed when it rains. But one secret was still waiting. Every page of the Wycliffe guestbook was a death sentence. The guestbook sat on a crooked table near the entrance, its leather binding worn, its pages curled from years of lantern smoke and damp mountain air. Travelers would dip the quill, sign their names with weary relief, and smile at the promise of rest. To them it was routine. To the Wycliffes it was a ledger of prey. Dozens of names filled the book, but beside them no recorded departure, no signatures of leaving. The ink bled slightly into the paper, names locked in time. Peddlers from Knoxville, honeymooners from Asheville, a traveling minister, even a U.S. mail courier. Each line seemed to whisper the same unspoken truth: they came, but never went. When investigators decades later uncovered fragments of the book, they realized it was more than evidence. It was a tombstone written in ink. Inside the inn, the sound of the pen scratching across the parchment was often the last trace of a traveler's existence. Some survivors of nearby mountain cabins claimed that when the wind howled, they could hear phantom whispers calling the names from the book, as if the pages themselves were alive, demanding to be read. What kind of family keeps a record of every victim, as if proud of the count? The Wycliffes insisted to authorities that the book merely served for good business. Yet locals whispered it was more than record-keeping, it was ritual. Some believed the guest book wasn't just a ledger, but a curse itself. Names written within it were doomed to vanish. Even more chilling was the handwriting. On certain entries, the penmanship didn't match. Some names looked shaky, as if the hand was guided or forced. Others seemed oddly neat, too perfect, as though one of the Wycliffes had signed on behalf of the guest who never left. The psychological terror of the guest book lay not just in its content but in its permanence. Families of the missing would travel to the inn, clutching lanterns and hope, only to find the names of their loved ones neatly inked into the paper, proof that they had been there, but nothing else. One grieving mother claimed the guest book shifted when she touched it, as if the names themselves resisted being erased. Modern parallels are haunting. Corporations and dynasties also keep ledgers, not of missing travelers, but of debts, cover-ups, or secrets that swallow lives in silence. A page of numbers, much like this guest book, can be a death mark in disguise. The guest book remains one of the few surviving artifacts of the Wycliffe Inn. And yet, several names written inside were never identified, not even by families or towns nearby. But one survivor would change everything. The floorboards of the Wycliffe Inn were more coffin than carpet. Guests thought they were walking on sturdy oak planks, but beneath their boots, the inn itself was a mask. The wood creaked not from age, but from hollowness. Some swore they felt the boards breathe, shifting faintly, as though something below pressed upward in the dark. By day, the inn looked ordinary. Rocking chairs on the porch, quilts on the beds, warm cider by the fire. But at night, the silence grew heavier. The ticking of the clock, the hum of cicadas, the storm wind brushing the shutters, all drowned out by one sound that few lived to hear: the sharp snap of a trapdoor unlatching. Beneath the dining hall, investigators later discovered a hidden chamber connected by crude tunnels carved into the mountainside. The soil smelled of iron and rot. Torchlight revealed narrow crawl spaces leading into blackness, walls clawed with fingernail marks. Whoever dug them had worked for years, building a labyrinth under the inn, a place where cries couldn't reach the outside world. Locals told of dogs refusing to step onto the Wycliffe porch, ears pinned back, growling at the floor. Even children sensed something wrong. They claimed the boards were hungry, whispering that footsteps above were only bait. What kind of family spends years digging graves beneath their own home? One tunnel led directly under the orchard where the Wycliffes pressed cider, and when the soil was disturbed, bones surfaced among the roots. The psychology of such a place is chilling. To trap a guest in their sleep, drop them through the very floor they trusted, is not just murder, it's domination, a godlike power over life and death. The Wycliffes weren't innkeepers. They were executioners disguised as hosts. Imagine the terror. A traveler, awoken by creaking candlelight flickering, the floor suddenly giving way, the body plunging into cold black dirt. The smell of mold and old blood suffocating the air. And above, the sound of the trapdoor closing, sealing the world away. Some whispered the tunnels weren't just for hiding bodies. They were hunting grounds, where the Wycliffes released victims like rats in a maze, chasing them through the dark. Modern parallels echo here too. Basements, backrooms, secret chambers, all metaphors for the hidden crimes of dynasties, from Jeffrey Epstein's island to cartel safe houses. Evil always digs downward, concealing its rot beneath polished floors. The trapdoor was only the beginning. What the Wycliffes served at their tables was far worse. But the stew had a sweetness, No one could explain. The Wycliffe family stew tasted too sweet to be venison. Travelers often praised the meals at the inn. The stews were hearty, the meat tender, the broth rich and oddly comforting. On stormy nights, when thunder shook the windows and the smell of wood smoke curled through the rafters, guests felt grateful for such warmth. But something about the taste lingered. Locals began whispering that no one had ever seen the Wycliffes hunt, yet they always had meat simmering in their pots. The stew had a strange sweetness, unlike deer, hog, or bear. Some who survived a meal described it as both savory and cloying, with a texture they couldn't quite place, and afterward they dreamed of screams. In the kitchen, black iron pots bubbled on the hearth, steam clouding the windows. The smell was rich, heavy, almost metallic. Knives clattered against the worn chopping block, where stains never fully scrubbed away. To those who entered, the atmosphere carried more than cooking, it carried secrecy. If the Wycliffes weren't serving game, then what or who was in the pot? One traveler swore he found a gold tooth at the bottom of his bowl and fled before the family noticed. The psychology of such an act is primal and terrifying. To feed victims to unsuspecting guests is not only murder, but a mockery of trust, a ritual humiliation. Each bite bound travelers closer to the Wycliffe's darkness, turning them into participants in horror they didn't understand. Even the orchard cider tasted strange. Sweet, yes, but with a sharp edge, as though the soil itself had been fed with more than rainwater. When fragments of bone were unearthed beneath the orchard, some showed marks, not of animals but of knives. The Wycliffe Inn blurred the line between hospitality and hunger, between survival and sadism. Every bowl of stew became a silent contract. You are no longer guest, but prey. And chillingly, history repeats itself. From the Donner Party to modern cartel kitchens where victims vanish, the cannibal rumor is one that never dies. Powerful families, corporations, and even governments often feed on the innocent, not with stew, but with lives consumed, erased, forgotten. To this day, mountain folklore warns, never eat stew offered on a lonely road in the Smokies, for you may taste more than meat. But then came the voice of one man who lived to tell the tale. Only one man lived to tell what really happened inside the Wycliffe Inn. His name was Elias Turner, a traveling salesman from Virginia. He arrived at the Wycliffe in one rainy autumn night in 1897, his boots caked with mud, his body aching from miles on horseback. The inn looked like salvation, warm firelight glowing through rain-streaked windows, laughter drifting faintly from within. But from the moment he stepped across the threshold, Elias felt something wrong. The air was thick, sour, as if the walls themselves exhaled secrets. The Wycliffes greeted him with smiles too wide, voices too sweet, insisting he rest, eat, and stay the night. At dinner, Elias swore he heard a muffled cry beneath the floorboards, a child's voice, cut short by a heavy thud. He pushed his bowl aside, appetite gone, but the Wycliffes urged him to eat. Their eyes lingered on him too long, watching, measuring. That night they locked his door for safety, they said. Yet Elias couldn't sleep. He kept hearing it, faint scratching, like fingernails clawing wood beneath the bed. Hours later, the floor suddenly shifted. With a jolt, the bed frame tilted. The planks beneath him creaked open. A trapdoor. He leapt up, heart hammering. From below came a draft of air, cold, damp, reeking of rot. He heard whispers, then the sound of something dragging. What do you do when the very floor beneath you wants to swallow you alive? Elias jammed a chair against the door and jumped from the second-story window into the storm, breaking his ankle but saving his life. Through wind and rain, he crawled into the woods, blood soaking his trousers, while lanterns flickered behind him on the porch, the Wycliffes searching. He swore he heard their laughter echoing through the trees. When Elias finally stumbled into a logging camp 2 days later, raving and half delirious, the men there thought he was mad. But when he emptied his pocket, they found proof. A gold tooth he claimed had been in his stew, still stained with broth. Elias vanished months later, before ever testifying. Some say the Wycliffes tracked him down to silence him forever. Psychologically, Elias represents the rare fracture in the Wycliffe's mask. A man who saw the truth, felt the terror and lived to whisper of it, but whose voice was soon drowned in silence. Even today, his story mirrors modern whistleblowers who glimpse the horror inside powerful dynasties, only to disappear before they can speak. The Wycliffe Inn should have been shut down after Elias' tale, but instead, the sheriff called it nonsense, and the family kept smiling, cooking, and welcoming strangers. But the lawmen themselves had secrets tied to the Wycliffes. The Wycliffe Inn didn't just claim lives, it devoured them whole. By the winter of 1898, the inn had become a trap for drifters, salesmen, and weary travelers seeking shelter from the bitter Appalachian cold. Guests walked in through heavy oak doors, greeted by the faint scent of burning pine. Yet beneath that warmth lingered another odor, something sweet, metallic, and foul, like iron left to rot in damp earth. Most ignored it. Most never had the chance to question it. Locals began whispering that the Wycliffes never bought meat from the butcher. For a family hosting dozens of guests each month, how was their pantry always stocked, their stew pots always full, when no deliveries were ever made? The unease deepened when hunters reported seeing fresh graves behind the inn, shallow mounds covered with hastily turned soil. The Wycliffes claimed they were burying livestock, but the hunters swore the shapes beneath the dirt were human-sized. A mail carrier vanished on his route. His horse returned without him. Reins dragging, eyes wide with terror, the last letter he was known to deliver, addressed to the Wycliffe Inn. Nights at the inn became unbearable for survivors who spoke later. They described sounds scratching from beneath the floorboards, like nails dragging on wood. Others spoke of footsteps packing their rooms, though no one stood inside. A few woke to see candlelight flickering in their mirrors, even when no candle burned. One woman swore she saw Abigail Wycliffe herself in the kitchen at dawn, stirring a pot of stew with her long hair unpinned and her lips moving in silent prayer. She never saw Abigail's eyes, only the reflection of firelight glinting off something in the pot. The smell turned her stomach. She fled before sunrise. How many bodies does it take before a town stops pretending nothing is wrong? This was not just a family business. It was a machine of silence, terror, and complicity. Just as modern scandals show how dynasties cover up crimes, whether corporate, political, or royal, the Wycliffes relied on fear and whispers to keep their walls intact. Because when the first body finally washed up downstream, bloated and pale with its throat cut clean, the townsfolk could no longer look away. When the river gave up its dead, the Wycliffe Inn's mask began to crack. The spring of 1899 brought heavy rains to the Smoky Mountains. Rivers swelled, carving through valleys with a roar that shook the ground. And in that violent current, a secret surfaced. A body bloated, pale, and waterlogged washed ashore near a logging camp. The throat had been slit with surgical precision, the pockets turned inside out. Word spread quickly. The corpse was the missing mail carrier. His mailbag was recovered half buried in the mud, every letter inside torn open, except for those addressed to the Wycliffe Inn. When the sheriff came to investigate, he was met with a chilling calm. Abigail Wycliffe, dressed in mourning black though no family member had died, smiled thinly and offered tea. Inside, the inn smelled of rosemary and charred wood, but beneath it lingered that same sickly sweetness, metallic and rancid, clinging to the rafters. Travelers' belongings, coats, boots, and hats, hung neatly by the door, though no guests had signed the ledger in weeks. The sheriff found 3 names crossed out in the register, their dates of arrival written but no record of departure. When he asked about them, Abigail claimed they had left at dawn, yet no witness in town had seen them pass. That night, lanterns were seen flickering from the inn's cellar windows. Some swore they heard muffled cries carried on the wind. Others claimed to see shadows moving behind the curtains upstairs, jerky and unnatural, like marionettes on strings. The fear spread like wildfire. Families locked their doors at night, mothers kept children inside, and travelers began avoiding the Smokies altogether. But the Wycliffes didn't seem bothered. Their tables remained set. Their kitchen fires burned bright, and the inn stood tall, like a predator unafraid of being seen. How long can evil hide in plain sight before someone dares to confront it? The story of the Wycliffes echoes modern dynasties, families, corporations, even governments that thrive on silence. Their crimes hidden in plain view until a single slip shatters the illusion. Just like the body in the river, truth always surfaces. The sheriff vowed to return with deputies the next day. But when they arrived, the inn's doors were wide open, and the Wycliffe family was gone. The Wycliffe Inn was empty, but it wasn't silent. When the sheriff and his deputies pushed through the oak doors, the inn felt wrong, like walking into a house that still breathed. The air was heavy with the smell of burnt pine and something sour, coppery, almost metallic. A pot still simmered on the stove, though no fire burned beneath it. The stew bubbled unnaturally, thick and dark, as if stirred by unseen hands. The ledger sat open at the counter, quill laid neatly beside it. But now, 5 more names had been crossed out since the sheriff's last visit. None of those guests had been reported leaving town. Upstairs, every bed was perfectly made, except one. Sheets were torn, stained with what looked like rusted water, but the deputies knew it wasn't water. The mattress sagged in the middle as if something heavy had been pressed into it and then removed. The cellar was worse. Lanterns revealed claw marks etched deep into the stone walls. Shackles still clung to iron rings, swaying gently, though no breeze moved in that underground chamber. One deputy swore he heard a faint moan, muffled, as though carried from beneath the earth itself. In the corner of the cellar, they found crates filled with personal belongings, watches, rings, journals, boots, all carefully arranged as if catalogued. One journal stopped mid-sentence. "If you find this, they already know." The deputies staggered out, shaken. They wanted to torch the inn on the spot, but the sheriff stopped them. He needed answers. He needed proof. Yet as they left, one deputy noticed something carved into the wooden doorframe by the exit. "Those who check out live in us." What kind of family leaves behind a home designed to swallow its guests whole? The horror of the Wycliffe Inn mirrors the cover-ups of modern scandals, where the evidence isn't destroyed, but displayed in plain sight, daring anyone to call it out. Just as powerful families today flaunt their wealth built on secrets, the Wycliffes left their sins on display, confident no one would dare expose them. That night the sheriff ordered the inn locked. But when he returned at dawn, the doors were wide open again, and the stew pot was empty. The townsfolk swore they saw the Wycliffes after they vanished. The sheriff's deputies wanted the inn burned to ash. But before torches were raised, the town began whispering of strange sightings. Farmers in the smoky foothills reported a tall figure in black drifting through the tree line at dusk, her long hair unbound, her face hidden beneath a veil. She carried something in her arms, sometimes a bundle, sometimes nothing at all, and each time she appeared, livestock went missing. One boy claimed he saw Abigail Wycliffe cradling a child, its skin pale and swollen, its eyes wide open though it never blinked. His father whipped him for lying, but the boy never set foot near the inn again. At the same time, hunters reported hearing hymns echoing through the forest. The voices were low, mournful, and layered, as if many throats were singing in unison, though no one could find the source. A mist would roll in, thick as smoke, curling around trees and suffocating lantern light. When it lifted, the hunters always found bones, picked clean, scattered, and sometimes arranged in shapes no man could explain. A traveling preacher claimed he saw the Wycliffe sons digging shallow graves on the ridge, only for the bodies inside to suddenly sit up and walk with them into the woods. No one believed him until he was found hanged behind the church 2 weeks later, his Bible missing. The sheriff grew desperate. If the Wycliffes had fled, why did their shadow still stretch across the valley? Why did the inn's windows glow at night even when no one was inside? Fear spread faster than truth. Families packed wagons and fled. Inns in nearby towns began advertising, "Safe lodging, not the Wycliffe place." But for those who stayed, every creak in the woods, every whistle of wind against glass carried the weight of something unnatural. What if the Wycliffes never left because the inn itself wouldn't let them? This was not just a family story anymore. It had become a legend, a curse whispered like the Kennedys, family tragedy, a dynasty rotting from within yet still haunting the living. The Wycliffes had moved beyond scandal. They had become myth. And then one stormy night, lightning struck the inn's roof. The flames lit up the mountainside. But when the fire cleared, the building still stood, untouched. The Wycliffe Inn would not burn, as if the building itself refused to die. When lightning struck the inn's roof in 1900, townsfolk gathered in the rain, watching flames claw into the sky. The storm lit the valley like day. They cheered, believing the nightmare was finally ending. But as dawn broke, their joy turned to horror. The inn still stood, charred black but whole, its windows gleaming with fresh glass as if someone had already repaired them. The sheriff, trembling, tried again with fire and oil. He ordered barrels of pitch poured across the floors, torches pressed to the walls. Flames roared. Smoke choked the air. The heat was unbearable. But when the doors were forced open the next morning, every room was pristine. Beds made, curtains washed, the smell of fresh pine as if the inn had cleaned itself. A deputy swore he saw faces staring from the windows during the fire, pale, silent, and grinning. When they broke the glass to drag them out, the rooms were empty. The townsfolk panicked. Some claimed the inn was alive, feeding on those who entered, protecting itself like an animal. Others whispered it was the Wycliffes themselves, bound to the house, refusing to let their legacy of blood be erased. And then came the strangest tale of all. A traveler staggered into town one night, clothes torn, eyes wide, muttering about the red rooms. He swore he had escaped the Wycliffe Inn after being trapped inside for 3 nights. He spoke of halls that shifted like a maze, staircases that led to walls, and whispers that told him to eat, eat, eat. His hands shook as he described finding a dining room table laid out with human bones, arranged like a feast. When the sheriff asked his name, the man gave one already written in the inn's ledger, crossed out weeks earlier. Can a house itself inherit the evil of its owners, becoming more than brick and wood? The Wycliffe story resonates with modern nightmares, like corporations or governments too big to fail, institutions that survive scandal after scandal because they are designed to outlive accountability. Just like those dynasties, the inn seemed untouchable, feeding on silence and fear. The sheriff finally gave a single order: board it up, lock it, bury it. But as the nails drove into the wood, a voice was heard from inside, whispering, "You can't keep us out. You can't keep us in." The traveler's story of the Wycliffe Inn, Red Rooms, was too horrifying to ignore. He arrived at the sheriff's office half dead, shivering despite the heat of the lanterns, his teeth clicking like loose stones. His eyes darted around the room, refusing to settle, as though he feared the walls themselves might shift against him. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, each word torn from a throat rubbed dry. He claimed the inn swallowed him whole the moment he crossed its threshold. The front door slammed behind him, the lock twisting of its own accord. At first he believed he was alone. The rooms were spotless, the smell of pine needles sharp in the air. But then the halls began to change. Stairs twisted downward into dead ends. Doors opened to walls of stone. Windows looked out not on the smoky mountains, but on endless black forests where pale shapes drifted between the trees. On the second night he found a dining hall, long oak table, candles burning low. But instead of food, the plates were set with bones. Some gnawed clean, others still slick with meat. And seated at the table, unmoving, were figures with waxy skin and hollow eyes. He tried to run, but the inn would not release him. He spoke of corridors that bled, of walls that pulsed as though alive, and always the whispers: "Eat, stay, become." On the third night he said he entered a room unlike any other, the Red Room. The wallpaper dripped with scarlet stains, the floorboards sticky beneath his boots. In the center stood Abigail Wycliffe herself, stirring a pot. She lifted her head slowly, eyes glowing faintly, and whispered his name before he even spoke it. She told him he had already checked in weeks ago. He fled before she finished her sentence. Somehow the door opened, and he found himself stumbling into the woods. But the scratches on his arms, the bruises around his wrists, they were not dreams. The sheriff took his statement, but when he turned to fetch water, the traveler was gone. His chair still rocked slightly. His coat remained on the floor. It was as though he had never been there at all. Did he truly escape, or had the inn only loaned him out to spread its legend further? The tale spread like a contagion, cementing the Wycliffe Inn as more than just a cursed building. It became a living myth. Just as modern scandals feed off rumor and repetition, the inn thrived on fear, growing stronger the more its name was spoken. That same night, townsfolk claimed to see a lantern burning in the inn's highest window, but no one had gone inside. The town tried to erase the Wycliffe Inn from history, but some buildings refused to be forgotten. By 1901, fear had seeped into every corner of the valley. Businesses closed, farms lay abandoned, and mothers forbade their children from even speaking the Wycliffe name. The sheriff, now gray and hollow-eyed, called a meeting in the church basement. Lanterns hissed against the damp stone walls as he declared the inn a plague that must be buried, its memory sealed. The plan was simple: board the windows, seal the doors with chains, and cover the very path that led to it. They would scrub the name from maps, destroy the ledger, and swear never to speak of the family again. "If we starve it of memory," the sheriff said, "maybe it dies." But when they reached the inn, the front doors were already chained from the inside. The nails had been driven inward as though someone or something was locking the townsfolk out. Still, they worked by torchlight, hammering planks across every window, sealing cracks with tar. Some swore they heard scratching beneath the boards, like fingernails dragging across wood or low voices humming hymns. But no one dared stop. The ledger was ripped apart and tossed into the fire. The name Wycliffe was scraped from signs and mile markers. For weeks, the town acted as though the building had never existed. And then the children began to dream of it. Night after night, they woke screaming of staircases that went nowhere, of faces at the windows calling them by name. One girl said she dreamed of Abigail Wycliffe tucking her into bed, whispering, "You're already home." The townsfolk grew desperate. Had burying the memory only fed the curse? They prayed louder, sang hymns longer, but the shadows still stretched from the mountain at dusk. Fear clung to the valley like fog, and no matter how tightly the inn was sealed, they could not seal it from their minds. How do you kill a thing that thrives on being remembered? It was the same strategy modern dynasties use when scandals erupt. Silence, censorship, denial. But the Wycliffe curse mirrored what we see today. The more people tried to forget, the stronger the legend became. And then, one stormy night, the boards across the inn's windows were found torn off, not broken, but neatly stacked by the road, as if waiting for the sheriff to see them. The curse of the Wycliffe Inn didn't end with the parents, it passed to their children. By the spring of 1902, the youngest in town began to change. At first, it was whispers, children waking in the middle of the night, speaking in voices that weren't their own. Mothers swore they found their little ones standing at windows at 3 in the morning, eyes fixed toward the mountains, lips moving silently as though repeating a prayer. Several children claimed they had visited the inn in their dreams. They described rooms their parents had never told them about, the cellar, the chained doors, even the red room dripping with scarlet. One boy, no older than 10, came to school with a drawing. Crude, scratched in charcoal, it showed Abigail Wycliffe standing at the foot of his bed. In her hand she held a lantern, and inside the lantern's glass he had drawn himself screaming. The sheriff's patience broke when children began disappearing. A girl vanished from her bed while her parents slept beside her. A group of boys went missing on their way to fish the river. Each time, their shoes were found pointing toward the forest path that led up to the Wycliffe Inn. One child was later discovered wandering barefoot in the woods, whispering, "She tucked me in, but I couldn't wake up." His skin was ice cold, though the summer air burned hot. Panic overtook the town. The church held nightly vigils. Parents nailed their doors shut and slept with shotguns. But the dreams continued, as if Abigail herself was walking the valley at night, gathering children the way she once gathered travelers. What is more terrifying, the curse of a place, or its ability to take root inside the innocent? Just as modern dynasties pass their scandals and sins onto the next generation, so too did the Wycliffe legacy cling to the children, binding the future to the past. It was no longer about the inn itself. It had become about inheritance, an evil passed down like blood. And then, one morning, the sheriff awoke to find his own granddaughter gone. Her doll lay neatly on the porch, dressed in a miniature black veil. When the sheriff's granddaughter vanished, the Wycliffe curse stopped being legend. It became war. The old man's face hardened into stone the morning he found the doll. It sat on the porch like an offering, dressed in a hand-sewn black veil, its glass eyes fixed on the mountains. His granddaughter's bed was cold, the window wide open though no footprints marked the dew-soaked ground outside. The townsfolk gathered in silence, watching the sheriff clutch the doll with trembling hands. For years, he had begged them to ignore the inn, to starve it of attention. But now, with his own blood taken, he swore he would tear it down piece by piece. He assembled every man willing to fight. Lanterns were lit, rifles loaded, prayers whispered through clenched teeth. The path up the mountain was slick with rain, every step heavy with dread. The forest groaned as wind rattled branches, carrying with it the faintest sound, the laughter of a child. When they reached the inn, the front door was wide open, candles burning inside, a feast laid out across the table. And at the head of the table sat the sheriff's granddaughter, alive, smiling, and wearing a black veil. The men surged forward, but the girl's smile faded into something else, her lips curling back, her voice too deep for her small throat. "She's waiting for you," she whispered, and then her eyes rolled white. The walls groaned as though the house itself were breathing. The candles sputtered but never died. One man swore the floorboards pulsed beneath his boots, beating like a heart. The sheriff, gripping his rifle, shouted her name, but the girl only tilted her head as if she no longer recognized him. Then from the staircase above, Abigail Wycliffe appeared, lantern in hand, her figure half shrouded in shadow. "Welcome home," she said. "We've been saving a place for you." The men raised their rifles, but the sheriff ordered them to hold. He couldn't risk a shot, not with his granddaughter caught between them. The room felt alive, air thick with the smell of pine and copper, as if blood itself was burning in the lamps. Would you risk your soul to save your blood? It mirrored the choices faced by powerful dynasties even now, when the sins of the family demand loyalty, even at the cost of morality. Blood ties stronger than truth, stronger than fear. The sheriff stepped forward, rifle lowered, and whispered, "Take me instead." By day, the Wycliffe Inn's kitchen smelled of roasted meats, sweet breads, and herbs pulled fresh from the garden. Guests marveled at the warm, home-cooked meals that seemed to flow endlessly from its iron pots. But once the laughter faded and the dining hall emptied, the kitchen transformed into something else entirely, an apothecary of nightmares. Evangeline stood at the long oak table, a dozen jars lined before her like soldiers awaiting command. Dried foxglove, powdered arsenic, belladonna leaves so dark they seemed to drink in the candlelight. Each substance had its own place in her carefully labeled system. The inn's visitors saw a generous host, but here she was an alchemist of death, measuring powders not in teaspoons but in fates. Dr. Ashford had once glimpsed this hidden ritual. He had been summoned under the pretense of treating her ailing nerves, but what he found was a woman grinding seeds with a mortar and pestle, her face serene as though preparing a tonic for a friend. "This," she whispered, holding up a vial, "is far more reliable than any pistol." Her smile was haunting. "A man never sees his death if he eats it willingly." Her methods were chillingly meticulous. Poison wasn't simply poured into a glass. It was folded into gravy, stirred into wine, or baked into the crust of a pie. Victims often died slowly, their symptoms brushed off as foodborne illness or seasonal fever. By the time suspicion arose, the guest was already buried. Locals began to notice a grim pattern. Those who dined heartily seemed to vanish more often than the ones who ate sparingly. One farmhand, returning late to fetch a forgotten coat, swore he saw Evangeline spooning something black and tar-like into a pot, only to quickly cover it with a thick stew. He never spoke of it publicly, but his whispered account spread like wildfire. The true horror wasn't just the deaths, it was the trust. Travelers ate with gratitude, never suspecting that the same hands breaking bread with them were already plotting their graves. The kitchen, once the heart of hospitality, had become a theater of betrayal. Today, forensic historians speculate that the Wycliffes may have been among the earliest serial poisoners in the region, refining techniques later mirrored by infamous murderesses across Europe. Their kitchen wasn't merely a place of sustenance. It was a laboratory where meals became weapons. And yet, as sinister as her poisons were, Evangeline's deadliest tool wasn't in her jars at all. It was in her performance, the way she smiled as she ladled stew, the warmth in her voice as she poured wine. She understood a chilling truth. People rarely fear what tastes good. The question that lingers is darker still. How many of her victims praised the food, smiling with gratitude in the very last meal of their lives? Hidden beneath a false drawer in the Wycliffe Inn study lay the object that tied everything together. Not a diary of love, not a cookbook of recipes, but a ledger. To any outsider, it might appear to be a record of debts, guests, and expenses. But to those who dared to read between the neat rows of ink, it was nothing short of a confession. The ledger cataloged names, dates, and curious notations. Paid in full, unfinished, delayed. Many of the entries ended abruptly, as though cut short. But what unsettled Dr. Ashford when he first examined its pages wasn't just the missing names. It was the crimson stains that dotted the margins, blotches that looked suspiciously like blood. Each victim had been reduced to numbers and profit. Next to some names, the word estate appeared, followed by tallies in British pounds. Jewelry, livestock, land deeds, all were carefully noted. It was as if the Wycliffes had turned murder into a business model, therein doubling as both a sanctuary and a slaughterhouse. One entry chilled Ashford to his core. Mr. Hollingsworth, 12 guineas, 2 horses, gold fob watch, disposed, paid in stew. The phrase paid in stew reeked of cruelty, a mocking reminder of how death had been disguised as dinner. But the ledger was more than evidence of greed. It revealed patterns, families left without breadwinners, children suddenly orphaned, properties transferred quietly to distant relatives of the Wycliffes. Piece by piece, the innkeepers were weaving themselves into the financial fabric of the county, growing rich from the very people who had trusted them with shelter. What horrified modern historians even more was the precision. Unlike the chaos of highwaymen or bandits, this was cold accounting. Every life had a value. Every body had a profit margin. The ledger proved that these murders weren't crimes of passion or survival. They were premeditated, organized, and sustained over years. One page near the center bore a chilling flourish. In Evangeline's delicate handwriting were the words, "All debts are collected in the end." For Dr. Ashford, this was the breaking point. He realized he wasn't just dealing with rumors of missing travelers. He was staring at a blueprint of mass murder, disguised in polite bookkeeping. Yet he also knew that bringing this evidence forward would be dangerous, because whoever kept such meticulous records would kill to keep them hidden. The ledger ended abruptly with a blank page, as if waiting for the next entry. And that's what made it unbearable. Who would have been written there if the truth hadn't come to light? She wore mourning black, but her eyes sparkled with hunger. Evangeline Wycliffe understood one truth better than most women of her time. Grief could be a weapon. Draped in widow's attire, she became the perfect mask of sorrow. Guests pitied her. Townsfolk offered charity, and men, lonely, unsuspecting travelers, let their guard down in the presence of a woman they thought broken. The so-called widow wasn't a victim. She was the bait. Late at night, when the fire crackled and rain battered against the shutters, she would sit with travelers at the inn's hearth, her voice low, tremulous. She spoke of her lost husband, of the cruel fate that left her alone to run the inn, and while they sipped the warm broth she served, her words lulled them into vulnerability. They trusted her. Some even offered proposals of marriage, thinking they'd stumbled upon a second chance at life. But in truth, every sympathetic glance, every comforting smile was a step closer to their graves. One account pulled from the blood-stained ledger told of a merchant named Caleb Turn. He had sat across from Evangeline one stormy night, drinking cider and listening to her tale of despair. The smell of cinnamon and roasting pork filled the room. He reached for her hand, promising to return with gold and perhaps a future together. Caleb never made it home. His name was crossed out in neat ink, settled, disposed. Evangeline's grief wasn't just performance, it was her weapon of seduction. The psychological cruelty of her act mirrored tactics used in modern scandals, where corporations, politicians, even dynasties, wrap their corruption in the cloak of victimhood. We pity them, then discover too late we've been devoured. The Wycliffes were simply playing a game that powerful families still play, turn tragedy into leverage. But here, the haunting detail. Guests remembered her perfume, the faint sweetness of lavender oil lingering in the hallways. Survivors described it as the last scent they inhaled before slipping into drugged sleep. Lavender, the fragrance of rest, became the fragrance of death. How many men fell not to knives, but to her smile? The inn ledger showed a rise in profits during Evangeline's widow years, when her act was most convincing. More land acquired, more estates swallowed. The black veil didn't just cover her face, it covered the blood beneath her nails. For townsfolk, the widow was a figure of pity. For travelers, she was an angel of mercy. But for those who never left the inn alive, she was the executioner in silk gloves. The widow's game wasn't just survival, it was empire building. And just when the performance seemed unstoppable, one suitor saw through her act. He realized the black veil hid not sorrow, but something far more dangerous. His suspicion would spark the first whisper of rebellion against the Wycliffe Inn. High voltage, the widow's smile hit a blade. High voltage, grief became her deadliest disguise. High voltage, guests pitied her and never woke again. But one secret was still waiting. The floor creaked not from age, but from bones burning below. When the sheriff and Dr. Ashford pried open the warped planks of the Wycliffe Inn cellar, the stench hit them first. Not the earthy musk of old wood, but something acrid, char, flesh, a bitter smoke that clung to the nostrils and refused to leave. Beneath the boards lay a pit blackened with ash, its walls caked in soot. At its heart, a mound of half-burned remains glowed faintly in the torchlight. The Wycliffes hadn't buried their victims. They had incinerated them in secret fires. Fragments of bone cracked underfoot as Ashford sifted through the ashes. He pulled out a warped silver spoon, the initials still faintly visible. Another investigator uncovered the heel of a boot, leather blistered from heat. These weren't just bones. They were lives reduced to embers. The horror grew when they realized how methodical the setup was. The pit was fed by a hidden vent, disguised as a hearth flue, which allowed smoke to vanish into the night air. Travelers could sleep upstairs, lulled by the warmth of the fire, never knowing that below, human bodies burned to dust. The inn itself was a furnace, its comfort built on cremation. Psychologists who later studied the case argued that the Wycliffes weren't just killing, they were erasing. Ashes left no trace, no graves to be discovered, no bodies to be identified. The family had engineered a perfect vanishing act, decades before modern forensic science could have exposed them. The silence of the pit carried its own weight. Every flicker of the torch revealed teeth blackened by flame, skulls cracked by heat, jewelry fused into grotesque shapes. Even hardened men gagged at the smell. One deputy collapsed, swearing he heard faint cries rising from the ash, like whispers of the damned. How many souls had been fed to this secret fire, their existence wiped clean as if they never walked the earth? The parallel to modern scandals is chilling. Just as corporations burn documents and dynasties scrub history books, the Wycliffes burned flesh to control their legacy. Erasure was their real weapon. Memory itself was under attack. But what made the discovery unbearable was this. Not all remains were fully consumed. Some skulls bore signs of blunt trauma, their mouths frozen open as if mid-scream. The fire hadn't silenced them all at once. It had swallowed them slowly, agonizingly, one flame at a time. The inn's fires had warmed guests upstairs, with the heat of other travelers burning beneath them. Dr. Ashford closed the ledger he carried, his knuckles white. "This place," he muttered, "isn't an inn. It's a tomb built on fire." High voltage, they burned the evidence and the guests. High voltage, ashes whispered beneath the floorboards. High voltage, the inn was a furnace of death. But one secret was still waiting. At midnight the townsfolk stormed the inn, and hell answered back. For weeks, rumors had spread through the Smoky Mountains. Travelers disappearing, horses found riderless on the roads, and faint cries drifting from the Wycliffe Inn after dark. By the spring of 1897, suspicion had grown too heavy to ignore. Lanterns were lit, rifles loaded, and a mob of farmers, widows, and grieving families marched toward the inn beneath a swollen moon. The night air was thick with mist, every breath tasting of damp smoke. As the crowd approached, silence fell over the road. The inn loomed ahead, windows dark except for a faint glow in the dining hall. Evangeline stood at the doorway, dressed in her widow's black, a lantern in one hand. Instead of fear, she welcomed them with a smile. "Come inside," she said softly. "The hour is late." Her voice dripped with calm, as though the mob hadn't come to condemn her but to join her for supper. That moment shook even the bravest. Could it be that the townsfolk had been mistaken all along? But then movement. Sheriff Hollard burst through the doorway, dragging a half-conscious stable hand who had escaped days earlier. His body was bruised, his voice weak, but his words shattered the silence. "They fed me broth from human bones." The mob erupted. Windows shattered as rocks flew. Doors splintered under rifle butts. Smoke rolled out from the kitchen, thick and greasy, the stench of burning meat unmistakable. The Wycliffes didn't run, they fought back. Hidden rifles cracked from upstairs windows. Hot oil spilled from the balcony, searing into the crowd. The raid wasn't a storming of an inn. It was a siege against a family that had fortified itself with the cunning of predators. The screams of both attackers and defenders mingled with the groan of timber as flames spread from the kitchen. The inn itself seemed to resist death, its walls moaning as fire chewed through the floors. One witness swore he saw Evangeline moving calmly through the smoke, untouched, as if she commanded the blaze itself. Was this a raid on murderers, or a desperate attempt to silence secrets too dangerous to expose? The chaos of that night mirrors modern scandals where whistleblowers vanish, documents burn, and truth dies under the weight of power. Just as corporations bury their crimes, the Wycliffes tried to bury theirs in fire and blood. By dawn, the inn stood half collapsed, its roof caved in, smoke still curling skyward. Bodies, both townsfolk and Wycliffes, lay scattered across the dirt road. But even then, no one could say for certain if all the Wycliffes had perished. Some swore Evangeline's black veil was seen drifting into the woods, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The raid may have destroyed the inn, but it didn't destroy the curse. The inn fought back that night. But one secret was still waiting. The ashes were fresh, the bodies were found, and yet no one was punished. After the raid, the Wycliffe Inn lay in ruins, smoldering like the carcass of a beast. Dozens of bones were unearthed, blackened and brittle, some still locked in the posture of struggle. The ledger was retrieved, its blood-stained pages cataloging names too numerous to ignore. And yet, when the dust settled, the trial that should have shaken Tennessee to its core never truly happened. No jury ever sat, no sentence was ever passed. Sheriff Hollard, who had led the charge, insisted the Wycliffes perished in the fire. But whispers told a different story. Witnesses swore they saw Evangeline, veiled and unburnt, slipping into the forest with a small child at her side. Others claimed at least two of the Wycliffe brothers fled through a hidden passage under the inn, vanishing into the mountain mist. When federal investigators arrived weeks later, they found a town silent. Families who had marched with torches refused to speak. The ledger itself, so damning, mysteriously disappeared from the courthouse archives. It was as if the mountain swallowed both evidence and testimony. The law was not blind, it was bribed. Records show the Wycliffes had quietly invested in surrounding lands, acquiring influence that reached into county politics. Judges owed them favors. Bankers depended on their gold. And when the time came for justice, those threads tightened into a noose around the truth itself. The silence around the case feels eerily familiar. Modern scandals echo the same story. Powerful families dodging justice, not through innocence but through wealth, secrecy, and fear. The Kennedys, the DuPonts, even billion-dollar corporations, each has buried truths that should have ended them. The Wycliffes were simply their 19th century reflection. But for survivors, silence was worse than death. Mothers who had lost sons, merchants who had lost brothers, all watched as the memory of their loved ones was erased. In the official record, the Wycliffe Inn burned in an accident. No mention of bones, no mention of stew, no mention of blood beneath the floorboards. How do you fight a curse when even the courts pretend it never existed? The lack of a trial gave the story its second life. Without justice, rumor flourished. Was Evangeline still alive, raising a new generation of Wycliffes in hiding? Were the mountains themselves complicit, sheltering the family in caves or hollows too treacherous to search? The fire may have consumed the inn, but it ignited a legend that law could not extinguish. And so the curse of the Wycliffe Inn lived on, not in the courtroom, but in whispers carried by smoke, echoing through the valleys of the Smoky Mountains. High voltage, justice burned with the inn. But one secret was still waiting. The inn was gone, but the screams still echoed in the trees. After the Wycliffe Inn collapsed into ashes, the Smoky Mountains became more than a landscape. They became a graveyard. Travelers whispered that the hills themselves held onto the voices of the dead, carrying them in the wind that howled through the pines. At dusk, hikers swore they heard footsteps crunching behind them, only to turn and find no one there. The raid destroyed the building, but not the presence inside it. Local farmers reported strange fires appearing on ridges at night, Faint orange glows with no camp nearby. Horses refused to travel near the ruins. Hunters claimed their dogs howled and bolted when approaching the clearing, tails tucked, as if scenting something foul beneath the soil. And every spring thaw, bones surfaced, bleached, splintered, scattered like the earth was spitting them back out. Dr. Ashford, who had risked everything to expose the ledger, wrote in his final letter, "The mountains themselves are complicit. They conceal the dead, then reveal them, as if mocking justice." His words mirrored the region's folklore, that the Smokies were alive, a vast breathing body that absorbed every horror committed upon it. Survivors began to believe the land itself was cursed. Families who had marched against the Wycliffes soon faced tragedies of their own, barns burning, children struck by illness, livestock vanishing overnight. Was it chance? Or was it retribution from the spirits of those burned in the inn's cellar pit? Mothers taught their children never to look too long at the clearing, warning that to meet its gaze was to invite the attention of the Wycliffes, restless dead. The atmosphere itself seemed tainted. Visitors described a constant pressure, like the weight of unseen eyes on their shoulders. The air smelled faintly of smoke, even decades later. Step too close to the ruins and the silence grew oppressive. No bird calls, no rustling leaves, only a ringing emptiness that gnawed at the mind. Were the Wycliffes truly gone, or had the mountains themselves adopted their hunger? Modern parallels aren't far. Just as dynasties bury their scandals in layers of rewritten history, the Smokies became the perfect accomplice, swallowing the truth until only myth remained. Yet myth was sometimes more dangerous, because it lived on in the imagination, reshaped and reborn with every retelling. Some said they saw a black veil drifting through the trees on foggy nights. Evangeline, still wandering, still hunting. And so the Smoky Mountains kept their dead, their forests hiding more than wildlife, their hollows echoing more than wind. Travelers still passed through, but fewer stayed overnight. The fear was not of wolves or bears, but of an inn that no longer stood, an inn that refused to die. High voltage, the dead were never buried here. But one secret was still waiting. Children in the Smoky still whisper her name, Evangeline, the widow in black. After the ashes of the Wycliffe Inn cooled, the story of Evangeline did not die, it transformed. What the law buried, folklore resurrected. In mountain cabins by crackling fires, parents warned their children about the woman in the black veil. She was not remembered as a murderer, but as a phantom who walked the ridges in mourning, searching for her next guest to check in. The legend erased guilt and replaced it with fear. In tales passed down, she no longer cooked flesh or kept ledgers. Instead, she became a shadow figure, appearing at crossroads, hitching rides from strangers or knocking at cabin doors during storms. Travelers claimed that if you offered her shelter, you would vanish by dawn, your bed still warm but your body gone. Folklorists recorded dozens of versions. In one, she lured hunters by weeping in the woods. In another, she appeared at weddings, veiled and silent, until one guest failed to return home. Children dared each other to say her name 3 times at the ruins of the inn, believing the veil would brush against their cheek in the dark. The fear was stronger than the truth. The ghost lived longer than the woman. The imagery of her veil was especially haunting. Survivors of the raid had described how she wore black even as flames consumed her inn. In folklore, that veil became eternal, a curtain between life and death. People claimed they saw it drifting through the fog at dawn, trailing across streams, or hovering above lonely cabins like a shroud. One hiker in the 1920s reported waking in his tent to the sound of soft weeping. When he looked outside, the mist parted to reveal a veiled figure at the tree line. She raised her head, but where her face should have been, there was nothing, just void. He fled the mountains the next morning, never to return. Was this only legend, or had Evangeline truly escaped justice to haunt the land forever? Psychologists studying regional folklore note how legends often mask trauma. Just as towns erased the Wycliffe crimes from legal records, they preserved them in ghost stories. The myth of the Black Veil served as both warning and memory, reminding each generation that evil could wear the mask of sorrow. In turning her into a ghost, the mountains absolved themselves of silence, while ensuring her hunger was never forgotten. And even today, hikers post online about strange encounters. A woman dressed in black at trailheads, vanishing when approached. Whether ghost or memory, Evangeline refuses to rest. High voltage, the Black Veil still walks. When authorities finally tore through the Benders' so-called death house, the earth itself seemed to vomit up their sins. Beneath the rotting planks of the cabin, searchers uncovered blood-soaked soil, and deeper still bones. Human bones, fractured, scattered, stripped of flesh by time. At first it was a single skeleton, then another, and another. Soon, the investigators realized they weren't standing in a home, they were standing above a graveyard. Every shovelful revealed more secrets. Crushed skulls, broken jaws, ribs cracked apart as if from brutal strikes. Families who had traveled together were buried together, but torn limb from limb. Some skeletons were missing heads, others missing hands, as though the Benders had not only killed but desecrated. Witnesses, neighbors who had long wondered about the disappearances, gathered at the edge of the property, gagging at the stench. Mothers clutched their children. Old men crossed themselves. The prairie wind carried whispers. How many? No one could answer. Word spread fast. Newspapers screamed about Hell's Half-Acre, branding the cabin a slaughterhouse. The Benders' land became a macabre carnival of horror. People traveled miles just to see the pits. Some came to search for lost relatives, others to satisfy morbid curiosity. The sheriff ordered the remains to be collected, but the sheer number overwhelmed even the most hardened deputies. The official count would never be precise. Some say a dozen victims. Others swear it was closer to 20. Rumors claim that wagons, jewelry, and personal belongings found in the cabin suggested many more who were never identified. Every artifact pulled from the dirt told a story of lives erased without mercy. The most chilling discovery, however, wasn't the bodies. It was the trapdoor above them. Standing in that one-room cabin, you could see the line, dining table, blood-stained floorboards, and directly beneath, the graves. Guests who had broken bread with the Benders were literally eating over the corpses of those who came before them. The community's fear shifted into rage. These weren't just outlaws. These weren't just killers. This was something darker, a family that used trust, hospitality, and the illusion of safety as tools for slaughter. And yet, as the graves filled with bodies, one question echoed louder than any scream. Where were the Benders now? The skeletons told their story in silence, but the killers who put them there had vanished into the vast American frontier. And with every uncovered skull, that unanswered question grew heavier, more haunting. Because the prairie was wide, the forests deep, and justice still out of reach. In 1897, the Wycliffe Inn opened its doors, and within a year, entire families vanished without a trace. The town of Gatlinburg whispered its warnings in hushed voices, but by Section 24, the story shifts into something darker. The macabre financial empire the Wycliffes were secretly building. The Wycliffes weren't just innkeepers. Behind the floral wallpaper and the smell of pine from the smoky mountain air, a ledger sat hidden in the floorboards of room 6. Inside, names were crossed out in red ink, guests who never checked out. But next to each name was another figure: land deeds, gold amounts, insurance payouts. The inn wasn't just a place of death. It was the front for a financial scam, a cannibal economy where corpses translated into real estate and power. The ledgers revealed how the Wycliffes expanded their reach across Tennessee and into Asheville, buying farms and businesses from missing families. What locals thought was bad luck or mountain feuds was actually systematic erasure. The inn devoured not only bodies but dynasties. A sheriff's deputy once claimed he smelled something sweet and metallic when he approached the kitchen at night, a stew simmering, faintly laced with iron. He left the next morning and never came back. When investigators finally pried into Wycliffe accounts decades later, some of the properties were still generating income, feeding silent heirs who never knew their wealth was built on flesh. How many modern fortunes today still carry the blood of those who checked in, never out? This is where the story mirrors the modern age. Billion-dollar dynasties quietly profiting off scandals, cover-ups, or the suffering of those erased. The Kennedys, the DuPonts, the Sacklers, different eras but the same sickness, empires nourished by shadows. The tension spikes when we realize that one figure, a young Wycliffe cousin, allegedly wrote to a business partner in 1903. Our house is built on bones, but bones are stronger than stone. That letter mysteriously vanished from courthouse records in 1921, right after the last Wycliffe died. As storms raged outside, thunder echoing like cannon fire across the Smokies, the Wycliffe Inn loomed silent, its shutters rattling, the smell of damp wood creeping into travelers' lungs. Generations later, hikers still swear they hear ledger pages turning in the night breeze. But one secret was still waiting. In 1903, a single letter could have destroyed the Wycliffe dynasty, but by 1921, it vanished without a trace. The mysterious bone letter, written by a young Wycliffe cousin named Nathaniel, became the most damning piece of evidence in the entire saga. Hidden in a tobacco-stained envelope, it allegedly contained confessions of fraud, disappearances, and something far worse: recipes. Not recipes for food, but coded instructions for preserving human meat. The letter was last seen inside the courthouse archives of Sevier County, where clerks swore it was cataloged. Then it simply disappeared. One clerk recalled the detail with a shiver. The letter smelled faintly of smoke, as if the ink itself had been scorched. The words were described as half confession, half curse. Nathaniel's own hand had scrawled the now infamous line: "Our house is built on bones, and bones last longer than stone." Imagine the atmosphere inside that courthouse: dust motes in the sunbeams, the creak of drawers opening, the scratch of pens. A letter that could have revealed the truth of dozens of deaths was there one week and gone the next. The disappearance lined up perfectly with the sudden arrival of a wealthy stranger in town, a lawyer from Asheville rumored to be on Wycliffe payroll. Within days, courthouse staff stopped speaking about it. Did the Wycliffes bribe the system into silence, or did someone destroy the bone letter to keep darker forces hidden? The chilling part: rumors claim Nathaniel himself was never seen again after 1903. Some believed he was locked in the inn's cellar, others whispered he fled west, haunted by his own bloodline. But modern historians draw eerie parallels here. Just as the bone letter vanished from records, entire legal files in modern scandals, Epstein's Black Book, Enron's accounting trails, and DuPont's toxic chemical evidence, also disappeared. The methods change, but the strategy never does. Erase the paper, erase the crime. In 1967, a box of miscellaneous family papers surfaced in a Knoxville estate sale. Inside was a burned scrap of handwriting. Experts matched the ink strokes to Nathaniel Wycliffe. The fragment read only two words: boiling vats. The bone letter's full contents may never be recovered, but its shadow still lingers. Visitors who wander near the old courthouse archives swear they hear faint scratching noises at night, like a pen scrawling across paper in a hand long dead. But one secret was still waiting. Beneath the Wycliffe Inn, a hidden cellar held secrets darker than any storm outside. Locals had always whispered about strange noises under the floorboards, chains rattling, muffled cries, the dull clang of iron against stone. For years, no one dared investigate. But when the inn finally collapsed in a fire decades later, rescuers discovered the entrance to a subterranean maze. The cellar was no ordinary storage space. The stone walls dripped with moisture, and the air carried a pungent blend of damp rot and coppery metal. In the center stood massive iron vats, stained black on the inside. Rats skittered across shelves where rusted hooks still hung, some twisted into grotesque shapes. The vats weren't for brewing beer or storing food. They were boiling vats, perfectly sized for rendering flesh. Sheriff's reports noted scorched bone fragments mixed with ash. One investigator swore he found teeth lodged in the drain pipes. The discovery sent waves of horror through the Smoky Mountains. This wasn't just a murder site, it was an industrial workshop of death. Were the Wycliffes merely killers, or had they perfected a gruesome business of harvesting human remains? Even more chilling was the evidence of confinement. Chains were bolted into the walls, with manacles small enough to restrain women and children. The stone floor bore scratch marks, as if fingernails had clawed desperately for freedom. Among the debris was a half-burned scrap of fabric, stitched with the initials of a prominent Knoxville family who vanished on their honeymoon. The cellar wasn't only the Wycliffe's secret, it was their vault, a place where wealth and death intersected. The ledgers matched with the cellar's timeline, suggesting that each guest became both prophet and product. Modern parallels are haunting. Just as the Wycliffe cellar swallowed its victims, today's corporations and dynasties bury their crimes beneath polished boardrooms. The Epstein Island, the Nazi death camps, the disappeared of Argentina, different ages, same cellar in spirit. When paranormal investigators entered the ruins in the 1980s, their equipment captured faint moans on tape, voices whispering names that matched those in the Wycliffe guestbook. Even in ruin, the cellar still breathes. Locals say on humid summer nights, a metallic steam rises from the earth where the vats once stood. Some claim it smells faintly sweet, like stew. But one secret was still waiting. When the Wycliffe Inn burned to the ground, the town thought its horrors had ended, but the fire only deepened the mystery. On a storm-lashed night in 1915, lightning struck the roof of the Wycliffe Inn. Flames roared upward, consuming the wooden structure like dry tinder. Locals gathered in the rain, their faces lit by the orange glow, whispering prayers that the fire would finally erase the curse. But when the smoke cleared at dawn, the cellar was untouched. The stone vault beneath the inn stood solid, its iron vats glistening with soot but intact. as though the flames had bowed to something darker. Survivors of that night swore they saw figures moving inside the fire, shadows dancing in the windows long after the last Wycliffe had fled. The blaze should have destroyed everything, yet somehow the ledgers survived, singed at the edges, but the names still legible. It was almost as if the fire had been guided, sparing the record of atrocities while erasing the inn above. Was this an act of nature, or did the Wycliffes orchestrate their own destruction to bury evidence? Eyewitnesses described a peculiar smell that clung to the air for weeks after, not just the acrid bite of charred wood, but a sickly sweetness, as if meat had been roasting in hidden chambers below. When investigators sifted through the ruins, they found bone shards fused into the foundation stones, as though the very building had been built with human remains. Psychologically, the fire became more than a tragedy. It became a symbol. For locals, it was proof the land itself had absorbed the Wycliffe curse. For descendants, it became an inheritance of silence. Some refused to ever speak the family name again, while others carried their wealth proudly, pretending the smoke had purified it. But history has a cruel way of repeating. Just as the Wycliffe's fire seemed to cleanse nothing, modern scandals, from Chernobyl to corporate cover-ups, prove that fire often conceals more than it destroys. Decades later, construction crews digging near the ruins unearthed blackened bricks that still smelled faintly of smoke, and in the soil, they found coins melted into strange shapes, as if the heat had fused wealth and ash together. The fire didn't cleanse the Wycliffe curse. It preserved it, locking bones, ledgers, and whispers in stone. And some say on storm nights, the ashes glow faintly, as if the inn itself is waiting to rise again. But one secret was still waiting. After the Wycliffe Inn burned, the ashes did not go silent. They began to speak. When the charred rubble cooled, townsfolk crept near the ruins. At first it was only children who claimed to hear it, a faint whisper rising from the blackened earth. Words half-formed, like sighs carried on the wind. Parents scolded them, but by the second week, grown men swore they heard it too. The ash pit gave off a strange sound at night, like pages turning, or chains dragging slowly through soot. And worse, it smelled of damp iron and something sweet, as if the fire had only half finished its meal. Locals noticed that whenever someone read aloud the names from the Wycliffe ledger, the ashes stirred, lifting in tiny spirals, as though recognizing the victims. Farmers passing by at dawn claimed they saw shapes rise in the smoke, silhouettes of women in dresses, men in traveling coats, children holding hands. The figures faded with the morning light, but the fear remained. Were these hallucinations born of guilt, or were the dead refusing to stay buried? The courthouse tried to seize the land, but none would buy it. Work crews hired to clear the site quit within days, saying they woke at night choking on phantom smoke. Horses refused to pass the road beside it. Even birds avoided the trees nearby. A preacher once attempted to cleanse the ashes with prayer, but his Bible pages blackened in his hands. Witnesses swore the leather cover cracked like burning skin. Modern parallels echo this unease. Just as the Wycliffe ashes whispered of crimes unpunished, modern scandals leave traces that refuse to die. Files leaked online, whistleblowers, testimonies resurfacing years later. The more powerful the family or empire, the louder the silence becomes. Some Smoky Mountain families claim the curse follows bloodlines. Descendants of those who stayed silent about the inn report recurring nightmares, waking in smoke-filled rooms, tasting ash in their mouths. Psychologists call it trauma memory. Locals call it justice. In 1979, hikers camping near the ruins reported hearing children giggling around their fire. But when they searched, they found only footprints, tiny, bare, and leading back into the ash pit. The ruins of the Wycliffe Inn still stand in shadow, a place where fire did not silence but awakened something restless. And when storms sweep through the Smokies, locals say the ashes shift, forming words too faint to repeat. The last Wycliffe descendant lived in silence until the curse caught up with him. By the 1920s, nearly every trace of the Wycliffe family had been erased except for one, Thomas Wycliffe, Nathaniel's nephew. He lived alone in Asheville, never married, never spoke of his kin. Neighbors said he moved through life like a shadow, tall, pale, and gaunt, carrying a heavy cane he didn't seem to need. But silence couldn't protect him. Strange events began to cling to his house. At night, shutters slammed even without wind. Smoke seeped from the fireplace though no fire burned. And when Thomas walked the streets, dogs growled and children cried. His neighbors discovered he kept a locked trunk in his parlor. When he died in 1933, they broke it open. Inside were fragments of the Wycliffe ledger and a bundle of ashes carefully wrapped in linen. The trunk also contained a single page from the fabled bone letter, its edges blackened. The line read, "If I am silent, the ashes will speak for me." Did Thomas keep the ashes to guard against the curse, or to feed it? Witnesses at his funeral claimed the air smelled faintly of stew, and one mourner swore he saw steam rise from the coffin as it was lowered. His grave marker cracked within a year, splitting clean down the middle as though struck by lightning. Local legend says that on storm nights, his grave glows faintly, and the sound of chains echoes from beneath the earth. Thomas's story became the final knot tying the Wycliffe curse to the land. Unlike the inn, his death could not be contained to one place. His neighbors dreamed of voices calling them by name. Some claimed to see Thomas in their mirrors, cane tapping, ledger in hand. Modern parallels haunt us here too. Dynasties where descendants carry the burden of crimes they never committed. The sins of the fathers echo in their bloodlines. From Nazi heirs to cartel families to the children of billionaires who inherit silence and guilt alike, the curse of wealth soaked in blood is never fully escaped. In the 1980s, a historian digging into Thomas's records claimed he received a phone call with only one phrase whispered, "Check the cellar." Days later, his office burned down. The last Wycliffe was supposed to be the end. Instead, his ashes ensured the curse would survive the century. And in the Smoky Mountains, travelers still whisper, "The inn may be gone, but the family never left." But one secret was still waiting. He thought he could outsmart the curse, but history had other plans. In the 1980s, a local historian named Dr. Raymond Kellard became obsessed with the Wycliffe story. He wasn't some amateur ghost chaser. He had degrees from Yale and Oxford, and his specialty was Appalachian folklore. But unlike others, he wanted proof. He wanted to expose the curse as nothing more than superstition. For years, he tracked down every scrap of the Wycliffe name, birth records, tax ledgers, land deeds. His crowning discovery was a series of letters between Thomas Wycliffe and an unknown priest in Charleston. The letters hinted at a sealed cellar somewhere near the ruins of the inn. One night in 1987, Kellard received a late call at his office. The voice on the other end was deep, almost distorted. It whispered only three words, "Check the cellar." When he returned to his office the next morning, the place was in flames. Investigators said it was faulty wiring, But Kellard swore he had left his notes, his entire life's work, locked in a fireproof cabinet. When he dug through the ashes, the cabinet was gone, not destroyed, gone. Weeks later, Kellard claimed a package arrived at his house with no return address. Inside was a notebook. The cover was scorched, the pages singed, but in the center was a hand-drawn map. At the bottom, in handwriting eerily similar to Thomas Wycliffe's, were the words, "The family sleeps below." Who sent him the notebook? A prankster or someone who wanted him to continue the search? After this, Kellard changed. His lectures grew darker, more frantic. Students reported he would pace the classroom muttering, "Ashes don't stay silent." His wife divorced him in 1990, claiming he spent nights digging in the woods near the ruins of the inn. In 1992, he vanished. His car was found abandoned by the roadside, trunk popped open, shovel inside, mud still clinging to its edge. His wallet and keys were on the dashboard. He was never seen again. The only clue, a page from his notebook left on the passenger seat. It showed a rough sketch of a staircase descending underground. At the bottom was one chilling word: hunger. Kellard's disappearance reignited the curse for a new generation. For the first time, the Wycliffe name reached the modern era, not through bloodline but through obsession. And if his notebook is real, then somewhere in the Smoky Mountains, beneath rotting soil and stone, something still waits. And Section 30, one will reveal what might be sleeping below. For decades, the map was ignored, until one man decided to follow it. By the mid-1990s, Kellard's disappearance had turned his notebook into a relic of fear. Most dismissed it as the ramblings of a broken man. But not Ethan Marlowe, a young anthropology grad who stumbled across Kellard's surviving papers at a library auction. Inside a plain cardboard box, wedged between lecture notes and student essays, Ethan found the scorched notebook itself. The drawings were crude but clear. A rough staircase cut into the earth, a circle representing a cellar, and a jagged mark etched like a warning. At the bottom, that single word still stared back: hunger. Ethan traced Kellard's last known location, near the ruins of the Wycliffe Inn. He rented metal detectors, studied land surveys, and interviewed aging locals. Many warned him, "Son, you go looking where Wycliffe walked, you won't come back." But Ethan wasn't afraid of curses. He believed the cellar was real, maybe a forgotten burial vault, maybe a secret storage chamber, and he wanted to be the one who found it. In late 1997, after weeks of digging around a collapsed chimney site, Ethan's shovel struck stone. Clearing away the soil, he uncovered a staircase descending into darkness. For hours he worked, exposing more of the steps, until finally his lantern light revealed an iron-bound door, its wood blackened with rot. And carved into the stone above the doorframe was a word, faded but unmistakable: Wycliffe. According to Ethan's private notes, later found by his roommate, he forced the door open and descended. The first thing he described was the smell, not decay, not mold, something older, heavier. The cellar walls were lined with shelves of broken bottles, scraps of fabric, and what looked like bone fragments. In the center, a stone slab table. But the most chilling detail was at the far wall. Ethan wrote, "There is an opening. It is not natural. It looks like a tunnel, and I swear I can hear breathing." After that final entry, Ethan was never seen again. His car, parked by the trailhead, sat abandoned for weeks before police impounded it. His roommate turned over the notebook, but no search party ever located the staircase he described. To this day, The cellar has never been found again. Did Ethan truly uncover the Wycliffe cellar? Or was the notebook guiding him to a fate already written by the curse? Whatever waits underground, if it waits at all, remains unseen. But one thing is certain. The Wycliffe name still casts its shadow, and anyone who follows it risks being swallowed whole. We'll uncover the most terrifying theory of all. What exactly was sealed inside the cellar? What if the Wycliffe Inn wasn't cursed, but guarding something? The disappearance of Ethan Marlowe left behind only one chilling clue, his final note about breathing in the cellar. With no body, no staircase, and no proof, locals filled the silence with theories. Some were absurd, others unsettling, and a few dangerously convincing. The most widespread belief is simple and horrific. The Wycliffes, once innkeepers, turned their guests into meat. Families checking in and never out weren't vanishing. They were consumed. When the inn burned, the family may have sealed their cellar to hide the evidence of decades of slaughter. Supporters of this theory point to bone fragments Kellard described, and Ethan's note about the smell heavier than decay. Cannibalism has appeared in other infamous cases, from the Sawney Bean clan in Scotland to America's Donner Party. Could the Wycliffes have been Appalachia's own forbidden feeders? Others believe the Wycliffes weren't cannibals at all, but priests of something older. According to Smoky Mountain folklore, settlers whispered about an appetite living in the caves, a presence that demanded offerings. The cellar in this theory wasn't a hiding place but a temple. Ethan's note about breathing fits too well. The idea of something alive, sealed away, waiting for worshippers to return. A darker, psychological angle blames the Wycliffe blood itself. The family was said to suffer strange fits, violent moods, and sudden madness. Modern historians link it to genetic disorders seen in royal dynasties like the Habsburgs or the hemophilia of the Romanovs. Perhaps the Wycliffes weren't cursed by gods or demons, but by their own DNA. The cellar then becomes symbolic, a vault where their madness was literally buried. But then comes the most dangerous question. What if Ethan didn't vanish in the cellar, but was claimed by whatever the Wycliffes tried to lock away? Just like corporate dynasties today bury scandals, whether it's tech families silencing whistleblowers or media empires covering abuses, the Wycliffes may have built an entire inn as a facade, while their true empire existed in shadows below. In recent years, a handful of amateur explorers claim they've found bricked-off tunnels near the ruins. One even posted blurry footage of what looked like claw marks gouged into stone. The video vanished after 24 hours, and the uploader deleted every account linked to his name. Were the Wycliffes monsters, worshippers, or victims of madness? None of the theories fully explain the cellar Ethan described, and if the breathing he heard was real, then the most terrifying possibility is also the simplest. Something down there never died. But one secret was still waiting, buried in the ashes of the inn itself. The fire that destroyed the Wycliffe Inn wasn't an accident, it was a cover-up. For years, locals told the same story. In 1897, a lamp overturned, flames devoured the inn, and the Wycliffe family perished inside. But when researchers returned to the site decades later, they discovered the truth was far stranger. The scorch patterns on the stone foundation didn't match a simple fire. Instead, they suggested multiple ignition points, carefully set, as if someone wanted the inn erased. A faded deposition from 1901, tucked into the county archives, reveals the words of Thomas Brantley, a handyman who had worked at the inn. On his deathbed, Brantley confessed. The fire was no accident. It was lit from within. The Wycliffes said it themselves. Why would a family burn their own livelihood? Brantley hinted at whispers of discovery. He said a group of travelers suspicious of disappearing guests had threatened to search the cellar. That night, the fire began. 1. The Wycliffes destroyed the inn to eliminate evidence of their crimes. 2. 3. They were trying to seal something in, making sure nothing crawled back out of the cellar. 4. 5. Or most disturbingly, they set themselves ablaze in a ritual sacrifice. 6. Heard screams inside that didn't sound human, howls layered with voices, echoing over the mountains like the roar of a furnace. A week after the fire, U.S. Marshals quietly investigated the site. Reports were never released, but local rumor claims they carted away crates from the cellar ruins. What was inside those boxes? Bones, artifacts, or something still moving? Did the Wycliffes torch their inn to hide their crimes, or to keep the world safe from what lived below? Just as corporations today burn documents to cover fraud or empires collapse under concealed scandals, the Wycliffe fire looks less like tragedy and more like a calculated erasure of history. Strangely, hikers still report the smell of smoke on clear nights, drifting through the ruins. A few even claim to see the flicker of flames where no wood or fuel remains, as if the Wycliffe fire never truly went out. The blaze may have destroyed the inn, but it didn't destroy the questions. What exactly burned that night, and why were outsiders so determined to bury the truth? But the most haunting discovery would come years later, hidden in the ashes themselves. In the ashes of the Wycliffe Inn, voices were still speaking. When the fire was finally extinguished, the rubble of the Wycliffe Inn was left to cool. The town buried the dead, rebuilt its life, and chose to forget. But decades later, treasure hunters and curiosity seekers came to the ruins, drawn by the legend. What they found wasn't gold or relics. It was something that made them flee in terror. In 1923, a group of loggers exploring the charred foundation claimed the ashes still gave off heat, smoldering like coals that refused to die. One man swore that as he sifted through the debris, the ash shifted on its own, forming the outline of a hand. He dropped his lantern and ran. Visitors often describe the site as unnaturally quiet. No birdsong, no wind, until suddenly, they'd hear a faint whisper carried through the blackened stones, like the voices of guests who never checked out. A researcher in 1954 documented hearing names, spoken low, like a roll call. When he cross-referenced them against local missing persons reports from the 1890s, the names matched exactly. It was as though the ruins themselves remembered the inn's victims. Yet, were the ashes haunted, or were they trying to reveal what really happened to the missing? Just as unmarked graves of abused children in schools and institutions are now being uncovered, the Wycliffe ruins became a crime scene long after the flames had cooled. History has a way of resurfacing, no matter how hard dynasties try to bury it. By the 1970s, paranormal groups descended on the Smokies, lured by rumors. Many left empty-handed, but one tape recording, captured by college students in 1978, contained 2 seconds of audio, a rasping voice that clearly said, "We never left." The tape was later stolen during a burglary and never resurfaced. Fire and yet, hikers still swear the ruins breathe. Ash drifts in unnatural spirals, footsteps echo on nights when the wind is still, and some say the ground hums as if embers deep below are waiting to reignite. The inn may have burned, but the ashes whisper of unfinished stories. And in 1999, when archaeologists dared to excavate the site, they uncovered something buried beneath the soot that turned legend into nightmare. But the bones they uncovered told a truth even darker. When they dug into the ashes, they found bones that didn't belong to the Wycliffes. In 1999, a university-led excavation team received permission to explore the ruins of the Wycliffe Inn. Officially, their mission was historical preservation, to catalog artifacts before erosion consumed the site forever. But as shovels scraped deeper, the dig became less about history and more about horror. Beneath a layer of blackened stone, archaeologists uncovered charred human remains. At first, they assumed these were the Wycliffes, the innkeepers who allegedly perished in the fire. But within hours, the forensic team noticed something wrong. The bones were fractured in unnatural ways, not consistent with fire collapse but with blunt force trauma. Too many bones. As excavation continued, the team realized there were far more skeletons than the Wycliffe family could account for. A dozen sets at least, men, women, and children. Some of the bones showed cut marks, sharp and deliberate, as though carved. Others were fused into grotesque shapes, as if they'd been burned long before the fire of 1897. Workers described the soil giving off an acrid stench, burnt hair and iron, thick enough to sting the throat, even after more than a century. The bone that match. Among the remains was one fragment unlike the rest, a jawbone far too large with teeth filed down to points. Experts couldn't match it to any known human record. Some whispered it belonged to an animal. Others muttered a darker word, hybrid. Were the Wycliffe ruins a burial ground for victims, or a feeding ground for something far worse? Just as mass graves at cult compounds like Jonestown and Waco horrified the world, the Wycliffe bones revealed that the inn was never just a place of lodging. It was a trap, and perhaps a slaughterhouse. Before the team could complete their study, government officials abruptly shut down the dig. Crates of remains were seized, sealed, and transported to an undisclosed facility. No official report was ever released. Some archaeologists claimed they were threatened into silence. Fire locals say the ground has been restless ever since. Hikers claim to see pale fragments jutting from the earth after storms, like the mountain itself refuses to keep its secrets buried. And every time bones surface, so do the whispers. The excavation proved the Wycliffe Inn was far darker than folklore suggested. But bones are only part of the story. For in 2005, another discovery near the ruins revealed that the Wycliffe curse was not confined to the past. It was alive and waiting. And what they uncovered next would terrify the modern world. In 2005, the Wycliffe curse crawled out of history and into the present. By the new millennium, the Wycliffe Inn was dismissed by many as Appalachian folklore. But then came the construction crew, a highway expansion project that cut through the Smoky Mountain foothills, right past the ruins. Workers were told it was just another site. Instead, they unearthed something that turned local legend into breaking news. Performing arts the discovery. While clearing ground, bulldozers struck a sealed stone vault. The chamber was reinforced with iron, its walls blackened as if by centuries of flame. Inside were not antiques or artifacts, but rows of coffins, crudely nailed shut. When pried open, they revealed skeletal remains. Many bore the same blunt trauma and carved markings found in the 1999 dig. One worker recalled the smell, sweet, sickly, almost like spoiled meat, even though the coffins had been buried for over 100 years. The unexplained bones. Mixed among the coffins were bones that didn't fit human anatomy, elongated spines, oversized jaws, and one skull with 4 eye sockets. The crew called authorities. By dawn, the vault was fenced off. By nightfall, the site was sealed. Officially, nothing was found. The modern cover-up. Days later, workers reported unmarked black trucks removing the coffins under heavy guard. One man leaked photos of a skull to a local paper. Hours after publication, the images were scrubbed from every platform, the editor fired, and the whistleblower vanished. What did the Wycliffes bury beneath their inn? And why are the powerful still protecting it today? Just as global elites bury scandals in sealed files, whether Epstein's Black Book or Vatican archives, the Wycliffe family's secret seems preserved by hands that don't want the truth exposed. Within a month, 3 crew members died in accidents, one crushed by machinery, another drowned, and a third vanished while hiking near the site. Locals said it wasn't coincidence. It was the Wycliffes reclaiming what was theirs. Fire, and then came the final blow. In 2007, the project rerouted. The vault site was declared unsafe and buried beneath tons of concrete. The official record reads, "Unstable ground." But to those who know the story, it was never about the ground. It was about what lay beneath it. The Wycliffe Inn's ruins are gone. The vault is sealed forever under asphalt. But legends say the whispers never stopped. And now they echo beneath a modern highway, carrying the same warning to every driver passing overhead. Guests checked in and they never left. But maybe the curse hasn't ended at all.